But we've got with us two old friends of the National Committee, Scott Kennedy and He Fang. You've got their bios, so I'm not going to repeat what's in the bio, but I'm wondering, in the bio, oh, it does say, in Scott's bio, it does say he was a fellow in the second round of the National Committee's Public Intellectuals Program, and it says that He Fang was a 2007 fellow of the National Committee's Young Leaders Forum. And they have written, which you also all have on your chair, this very interesting piece called "The United States, China, and Global Governance: A New Agenda for a New Era." And I just did a short podcast with them, and I attributed their ability to write this jointly to their affiliation with the National Committee. So we took full credit for this joint effort. But it's a fascinating piece. I know it's just literally been distributed. Is that right? So some of you haven't read it. So what Scott and He Fang are going to do is kind of summarize a lot what's in it. It's a very interesting piece. I fortunately got an advance copy, so I did read it. And I'll ask some questions and then open the floor to the audience for questions. But who's going to speak first? Scott will speak first. But, you know, you've got his bio, and you know he's at IU, and IU didn't win the NCAAs this year, and there's nothing else necessary.
Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Steve, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for hosting us. I want to thank the National Committee for giving us this opportunity to share the results of our research and thinking with you, and to get your ideas. I also want to thank the staff of our center. Andrea Chun, who's our communications director, is here. And we have staff in Bloomington, she's in Washington, and in Beijing. We're a multinational research center. And they all do a terrific job that have helped us over the years with this initiative. And then lastly, just a thanks to the Luce Foundation, which has supported our center and this research initiative for the last 3 years. So our center has offices both in Bloomington and then also in Beijing, where we're at Duiwai Jingmao Daxue at UIBE, where we've been since May of 2011. And the purpose of having an office in China is that Sarah Palin can see Russia from Wasilla, and but we cannot see Beijing from Bloomington. And when you're in Beijing, you can't see Beijing either because of the air. So we decided that in order to actually understand what's going on, to keep up with companies, governments, journalists, and others, that we needed to be there. And what that has done is afford us the opportunity to meet and cooperate with scholars like He Fang and his institute. This initiative that we've launched with Luce's support has involved 30 research projects by scholars in the United States and elsewhere. And in fact, one of our scholars who's done work on the global governance of the environment in China, Tom, is here today. Had his doctorate from Princeton, now is a postdoc at Oxford. Very important contribution to our work. We've had 4 international conferences over the course of the 3 years. We've had a series of 7 roundtables between Chinese business leaders and the U.S. Embassy leadership in Beijing to talk about these issues, and an experts group of global governance specialists here in the United States and China, and we sought their opinions in the crafting of this report, which we did in November, December, and January recently. So before I say more about our report and our findings, I thought I'd give He Fang just a second to say a little bit about his institute and the work that they're doing that's relevant to the project.
Okay, thank you, Scott. This is the website of our institute. Actually, we have the English one, but I think the reason why Scott chose the Chinese one is to encourage all of you to learn more about Chinese, but I'm sure that most of you can speak quite good the Chinese. We are the Institute of Chinese of the Institute of World Economics and Politics, affiliated to the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, And Chinese Academy of Social Sciences is one of the major think tanks in China. So unlike a university, like University of Indiana, which they do the theoretical research, we do policy-oriented research. So we have very close relationship with the major Chinese government department, like the Central Bank and National Development and Reform Committee and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Commerce. And we also provide some policy suggestions for the Central Party and the State Council. But neither of this job is as challenging as the work I cooperate with Scott. The reason why we are involved in this research project is because in my institute we have followed up the issue of global governance for quite a long period of time. We follow up the G20 and also the BRICS, the Regional Economic Cooperation. We have newly established a research center on global governance. And actually the topic was previously brought about by the former deputy minister, the deputy premier, Wang Qishan, and he's asking the question, how can China be better involved in global governance? But now he's not in charge of this issue anymore, but we find it to be a good thing to continue the discussion on the relationship between China and the U.S. on global governance. And that's the reason why we have this joint research project with Scott.
Terrific. Let me now turn to the report and the findings, and we only want to take about another 15 minutes or so to tell you largely what we've found, and then open it up for discussion. We're not going to try and tell you everything that's in the report because you have it. We also want to avoid mentioning things that are mistakes. And so we'll leave those for you to find later, or to and then we won't have to defend ourselves. But what we really want to do is have a dialogue, and some of the things that, and we want to know what's most important to you all. So if you remember one thing from our report, it's that several years ago, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bob Zoellick, in a speech before the National Committee, September 21st, 2005, called on China to be a responsible stakeholder. And we think that's a great thing. But we think the U.S. needs to be a responsible stakeholder too. And we think both countries, both the U.S. and China, need to be better and more responsible stakeholders. And so we are echoing what he said and adding to it. And we want to explain why we think both countries need to be more responsible stakeholders. His idea was that as a rising power, new to the system, but a big beneficiary of the system, China hadn't pulled its weight like it should, and that it needed to not only live up to its commitments, but provide public goods for the system from which it benefited. But we think the United States needs to do that too. Both countries have huge responsibilities, and the international governance system is facing a lot of challenges that will require these two countries to cooperate on to address. So that's the one thing I want you to remember. Now, I hope you remember a lot of other stuff, but please remember that. Okay? All right. So our report that Hufan and I have worked on touches on global governance generally, and then looks at three specific areas: trade, investment, and finance. And in each of these areas, we're trying to find out what are the best ideas to push global governance forward at different levels. Global governance is not just President Obama and Xi Jinping and others meeting at APEC in November to decide what the rules of the game should be, or at the G20 in some capital someplace in fancy hotels. It also occurs when they're implementing the rules or when they're implementing policies at the domestic level that are relevant and directly related to those international concerns involving international trade, etc., across borders. So our suggestions and things that we thought about are not just at the multilateral level in negotiations, but also at the regional level, things that the U.S. and China can do bilaterally, and things that both of those countries can do unilaterally, domestically, that you usually don't associate with global governance, but is actually what we found as important for pushing global governance forward as any of the other areas. So that's how we conceived of trying to address this problem. All right, so let me say a little bit about sort of our overall views about the U.S. and China and global governance, and then I'll say a little bit about trade, and then I'll turn things over to He-Fan, and he'll tell you about our policy proposals related to investment issues and finance. All right. So our general impression is that if you look at multilateral global governance, you'll see a world where not much is going on, or at least not much successful. I get to go to Geneva for my research, and it's amazing the opportunities I have to talk to people who run the WTO, who are ambassadors to the WTO, the staff there. It's like talking to industry association heads in China, people who don't have much serious responsibility and have a lot of time on their hands. People in Geneva now have a lot of time on their hands because they're not doing a whole heck of a lot, because the Doha round died a long, slow death, and there's nothing for them to do except enjoy very nice weather. The G20 had a terrific moment, the Pittsburgh Summit, where they tried to address critical problems that arose as a result of the financial crisis. But the G20's significance and real action has declined since. And as a result of this vacuum at the multilateral level, you're seeing countries resort to a variety of other techniques to help their economies or cushion the blow from the slow global growth. You have a variety of resort to protectionism, whether it's anti-dumping or the use of government procurement or other things. You see also the push towards regional free trade arrangements or preferential arrangements that are easier to reach rather than that are harder, more difficult through the WTO. And you see everybody printing money through monetary expansion. Call it quantitative easing, call it something else, but that's the same, another type of response to this vacuum. And we think these are all, some of these things make sense, but the broader context that these are relatively unhealthy trends. Now, it would be great if the United States and China could collaborate on filling in that vacuum, in making global governance much more vibrant and able to address these issues so that you didn't see countries running off to establish FTAs, doing things which may, in the end, have negative consequences for the global economy. It would be nice if they could do it, but they haven't, and I'm not sure that they're going to. And He-Fan and I believe there are three reasons why it's particularly difficult for the U.S. and China to collaborate on issues of global governance. The first is the contested identity of who China is. Chinese like to say China is a developing country. And for the last 34 years, China has developed at 10% growth per year. So at some point you wonder, how long are you going to be a developing country forever? Most others who look at China don't consider it a developing country, despite the fact that you have many pockets and places in China of severe poverty. They think of China as a large, rising power. But that's contested, and because of that disagreement, you see different expectations about what China's role should be. You also see contrasting approaches to global governance. The U.S. has a liberal market economy in which state intervention is generally frowned upon, where you have a vibrant civil society and industry associations that actively lobby, where you have both state actors and non-state actors collaborating, fighting with each other in the open. And what that does is that makes the U.S. Get involved in a whole variety of global governance institutions that support not only businesses, but support investors, labor groups, environmentalists, and both that occur in state-based organizations and in private-based organizations in which the state is just looking from afar at. China, on the other hand, is a country by, for, and of companies, right? And most of the global governance institutions in which Chinese care about the most are ones that help those companies. China also happens to be authoritarian, in which non-state actors are relatively passive in the policy process, where NGOs aren't well developed. And so you see China not only focusing on the interests of industry primarily, but also they're most comfortable in global governance institutions that states run. And when states don't run them, they feel very uncomfortable. And they like to do what I call sovereignize those groups. They like to figure out how to get state power into those groups. So those are the second difference. The third difference are conflicting economic interests. Now, obviously, the U.S. and China have a lot of common interests because trade and investment is so high. And American companies in China are making lots of profits. Annually, the AmCham shows 80 to 90% of the companies there are making profits, and it's the most profitable part of their global business. But there's lots of conflicting interests as well. As China moves up the value-added chain, Chinese are moving just into those spaces that American companies occupy, and that creates potential tensions as well. So, at the broadest level, our recommendations, just dealing with global governance in general, is that first, we think the U.S. and China ought to get their domestic houses in order. That's why we go to the polls. We're hoping that our newly elected leaders will do that. The U.S. has significant debt problems. We have healthcare problems in many other areas, which if we could resolve unilaterally, they would help make the global situation look better. Similarly, China can do a lot on its own to deal with its economy, with promoting changes in education, creating a social safety net that's stronger and broader, that will also make them better prepared to participate internationally. At the bilateral level, we've got a variety of recommendations in the report. The one that I just want to highlight right now is about the strategic and economic dialogue, which one participant who helped craft that says is neither strategic nor a dialogue. And we think it ought to be strategic and a dialogue. And we think it won't be that way unless President Obama and President Xi personally participate. And so we hope that's probably not going to happen in May, the next time they're scheduled to meet. But we think that if they're going to get anywhere and talk about really fundamental issues that affect the relationship and their roles in the world, that you better have the folks at the front of the line there. Otherwise, it's going to be bureaucracies talking to bureaucracies and engaging in talking points. Now, in terms of regionally, I'll say more about TPP later, but you've probably already sensed that we're a little bit concerned with TPP. But at the multilateral level, we are interested in a variety of areas. I'll just mention one now, the OECD. We think China ought to be a member of the OECD. And that's going to sound really crazy. There's 34 members of the OECD right now, and their per capita income is all much, much higher than China's. And you think of the OECD as a rich countries club. We don't think it ought to be. We think it ought to be a club for important countries in the world that set high standards for how the global economy ought to run. And China's not prepared today. You need a long roadmap, and so we think over a 7-8 year period, this roadmap can be developed in collaboration between China and the OECD, so that by 2020, in the middle of the 19th Party Congress's new leadership, whoever's running China then, maybe it'll be President Li Yuanchao or somebody, I don't know.
In 2020?
Well, no, it'll still be Xi Jinping, right? So
I think so.
Well, I'm glad you're good predicting. So, in any case, that's our suggestion there. And we can talk more about the reasons for that. Okay.
Li Yuanchao is the vice president, so
Yes.
maybe you're predicting
Okay.
a health issue.
No. All right, let me say a little bit about trade before I turn things over to Hefang. All right, and I'm going to be briefer here as I possibly can. I'm an academic, so I talk in 50-minute increments. So first issue related to trade, which we think overall is relatively healthy compared to the other elements of the relationship in global governance, is a large resort to trade remedies. And China is the number one target, as you know, of anti-dumping actions by the United States and many other countries. But it just turns out that the Chinese aren't only respondents in anti-dumping, they are big active users. The Chinese learned from folks like Tom Howell at Dewey LeBouf, a firm that actually went out of business, but nevertheless taught the Chinese how to bring anti-dumping cases. And so this firm in China, Huanzhong law firm, is one of China's leading anti-dumping law firms. They are what I call international ambulance chasers, trade ambulance chasers. And they look for companies and industries where they're suffering and then sue for relief. And so China is now one of the largest initiators of anti-dumping. We don't think that's particularly healthy. We could talk about the economics of anti-dumping to let you know that we think that's probably more veiled protectionism than promoting fair trade. So we think there ought to be a variety of reforms with the anti-dumping regime. In addition, if you look at globally, at the multilateral level, we're actually pretty comfortable with trade. China's participation in the WTO has been, I think, boring. It has been wonderfully boring. Everyone thought China joining the WTO would lead to major problems for this institution. It has handled them without really breaking a sweat. China has not flooded the WTO with cases. The country that faces the most cases at the WTO is the United States, not China. And China's record in WTO cases ain't too bad. China loses a lot of cases, but everyone who's brought before the WTO loses a lot of cases. China's also initiated a bunch of cases, and they win most of those cases, like everyone else who wins them. They hire good lawyers. They're on Connecticut Avenue, and they do a good job for China. Not Connecticut Avenue in Beijing, Connecticut Avenue in Northwest Washington. That's where everyone's WTO lawyers are. I would say a little bit about market economy status, just very briefly to say that this is one of the areas of the global trade regime that needs to be addressed. China, when it joined the WTO, agreed that for the first 15 years of its membership, countries could, in anti-dumping cases, treat it as a non-market economy. That's supposed to run out in 2016, meaning that by then China ought to be treated as a market economy in all those cases. But from what I hear, the U.S. is actually going to continue to treat China as a non-market economy and wait for China to sue it in the WTO and get another 2 to 4 years of life out of treating China that way, which we think is probably not a very good idea. So, all right, so that's the sort of general view. Trade, I'm going to turn things over to Hefan to say something about our views related to investment and finance.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Actually, on investment, we find it's very interesting because quite surprisingly, neither China or United States is the most important investor for the other part. United States used to play a dominant role in China's FDI, but now the share of U.S. investment in China's FDI has been declining continuously. And although China's investment in the United States has increased dramatically, especially after the global financial crisis, but still they have a lot of difficulties entering the U.S. market. And but this issue has been heatedly debated in China and the United States, and you can sense the huge gap between views from both sides. From China's side, Chinese people have the feeling that whenever a Chinese company wants to invest in the United States, and then the response will be some political resistance from the Congress and from the U.S. government. So these are some of the most famous cases, including Huawei, including some state-owned enterprises, but also some private companies like Huawei and Sunny. And but from the U.S. side, the U.S. company also complaining China is now, it seems like China is closing its door for U.S. company. But as Scott just mentioned, more than 90% of Chinese of U.S. company investing in China say that they are making more money than before. But the one U.S. CEO just told me that he thinks that China is like an Apple product. It looks very cool, but then it uses a totally different operation system, which may not be a good idea when now the whole world is connecting with each other. And in some cases, China is more arrogant and same as Apple, and never apologize, but now apologize to the Chinese consumers. Yeah. But we think this is one area which has the great potential for both China and United States. And at the bilateral level, we think we still need to push forward the negotiation of the bilateral investment agreement, but that will take a long time. It takes more than 18 years for China to close BIT with Canada. So it will be a prolonged process. But at the same time, there's other things that China and the United States need to do. Because we think this is a kind of grand exchange between China and the U.S. From China's side, China wants to invest more in the United States, but it's for the benefit for the U.S. because more Chinese investment will create more job opportunity for the American people. And from China's side, we should liberalize the service sector, and this will please the Wall Street guys, but at the same time, it is to the benefit of Chinese people. Because not only need China to open its financial sector, but also its healthcare and education, whatever. And China's manufacturing sector is very competitive, even by international standard, but its service sector is lousy. And one solution is that you just open up your service sector to introduce more private capital and also foreign capital, including American companies. And then you create competition, and then you can improve your productivity and increase your supply and lower the price, which can, in this way, you can boost the domestic demand. And the cooperation between China and the United States in the area of investment is not only at the bilateral level, but also at the global level. Because at the global level, well, Scott has mentioned the WTO negotiation is now going nowhere, but at least at the trade area you have WTO, and at least at the financial area you have IMF, but on the investment area there's nothing. So we have to build a set of rules governing international investment from the scratch. And if United States and China can cooperate with each other, and then I think that will be a good way that we can move forward and to increase the legitimacy of this new set of rules regarding the international investment. Because including China and also India and other emerging countries are becoming more and more investing countries. Not like they're traditionally just the recipient of foreign investment. And for the financial issue, traditionally the topic between China and the United States is the currency debate. Some American politicians always want to name and blame China as the currency manipulator. But we don't think that that's a very important issue. We think the debate should, the negotiation should move to more practical and constructive areas. China used to take a defensive position in this currency debate, and now it is concerned more and more about the spillover effect of the monetary policy, especially the QE policy adopted by the Fed. So far, so good. We haven't seen very huge risk. But in the future, if U.S. economy further recovered, and then the Fed need to exit from the QE policy, and what will happen if the interest rate in the United States increase, and then they'll induce a massive capital flight from China, and will trigger a kind of financial crisis. So this is a concern from China's side. And we think that at the international level, we have two specific proposals. One is regarding the adjustment of current-account imbalance. Before the global financial crisis, this is one big concern in the arena of international economic. And after the global financial crisis, the situation has been improved a little bit. For example, like in China, the current account surplus to GDP has dropped from 10% to now it's only a little bit above 2%. And U.S. also a little bit improvement. But we have to further rebalancing the Chinese and the U.S. economy, and if there's a very clear rule to be set in regarding the adjustment of current account, and I think that would be much better than just the focus on exchange rate policy, because exchange rate policy is only one policy tool, and it's not the most important policy tool in our opinion. And another issue is the short-term capital flows. After the global financial crisis, the financial regulation became a hot topic, but it's mainly among the developed country, because only the United States and the European countries, they have the very sophisticated financial market. And for many developing countries, the issue of financial regulation is very boring and irrelevant. But there's something that they concern more. And one is the hegemon power of the US dollar. And the US dollar is now the only international currency, but without any constraints. And also, there's no very functioning rule regarding the international capital flow. But this is one big concern not only for China, but for other emerging markets. So we think that maybe on these two areas, the current account adjustment and then the regulation on the short-term capital flow, that China and the United States can further cooperate. I'll stop here.
Thank you. There's a lot. This is a pretty broad-ranging paper. Let's focus just for a second on this very interesting proposal about over the next 7 years bringing China into the OECD, which is, I don't think I've heard much about that previously. Number one, how? Number two, what do you do about India, Brazil, and other countries similarly situated?
Well, I think many Chinese government officials will also be suspicious on this proposal. And if we really want to achieve this goal, there may be two areas that we need to do. One is from China's side, and we need to change the mindset. And but you can sense that there's some policy change from the Shibada report in the party's 18th meeting, and now previously China is very timid in international areas, but now they try to shoulder more responsibility, and they try to build in the term that's the new partnership between large countries. So China it gradually view itself as a large country. So there are two dimensions. One is developed country and the developing country, but another dimension is small country and a large country. So China is gradually view itself as a large country. So that's what China should do from its own to be better prepared for those responsibilities. And second, I think OECD should also have some reform to change its image from a rich country club to a large country club. So in this way, I think if other large countries, including India and maybe also Indonesia and other countries, can also not join OECD immediately, but there should be more room for their participation. and then gradually we can reform OECD as one of the most important platform for global economic coordination.
Rather than expanding the G20. Because
Well,
the G20 is you say big countries, that's the basis upon which the G20 was formed.
The problem with G20 is still not a formal organization, and because it only has this summit meeting annually, and this only has the minister level 4 times every year. So they do not have a permanent organization dealing with some routine works. And OECD, if we can reform that, I think that will be, at the least, it's another alternative to push forward the reform of global governance.
At the end of the investment section, you say the most practical way of fostering cooperation among China and the U.S. may be working out some large joint investment projects. And it's something which I strongly believe in, but I guess I would ask both of you, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, now China is investing more and more in Africa and also Middle East. So I think that there are some potentials that China and the United States can have a better cooperation in these areas. Actually, one Chinese company, if my memory is correct, is Sinopec or maybe the large state-owned oil company, and is investing in Iran, and it set aside 30% of its share for Shell company. So anytime if a Shell company want to invest in Iran, and this is this 30% share, and you can take it. So this is I think that this is one example that shows that the Chinese company, because now they are investing more and more, and they lack the expertise, and then they also are now worried about the sovereign risk in some areas. So I think they will be more than happy to invite foreign companies, including American companies.
In terms of Iran, I think we're going to have to put that one on a long back burner since it's against U.S. law.
Let me add to the answer to this excellent question. I think at the end of the day, the issue with the investment regime has to do with predictability. Currently, when a state-owned enterprise invests in the United States or elsewhere, there's no predictability about what's going to happen to the approval process. You can hire PR, law firms. You will get one answer here. You will go to Canada, Australia, Brussels. You will get different answers depending on whether it's raining. The several investments from Huawei investing all over Europe. Huawei is not investing here, so that leads to unpredictability. What business and good investment wants is predictability. The same for American investing going abroad. That's extremely important. That's partly why the trade rules are so helpful. It's not necessarily what's important is the substance of the rules, but that there are some rules and some guidelines. Obviously, we have some suggestions about what we think those rules ought to be, but some predictability is most important. So, on the one hand, I could say it's really important. Well, the U.S. and China could invest, for example, in high-speed rail in the United States. This morning, my son and I took the train from Boston down to here. It took 4 hours. Then tomorrow,
good train.
We're getting a great train station. So, if you develop high-speed rail between Boston and Florida, China has a little bit of experience doing that. You bring in the Germans and others. Right now we have lots of reasons why we don't have that, and I was trying to figure that out. You could look at shale gas or energy or joint investments. We're not going to invest in North Korea tomorrow because they're kicking everyone out, saying that there's going to be a war. Eventually, there will be places on the Korean Peninsula where going together will be better than one side racing ahead of the other. And so that helps with predictability, also helps with confidence building.
I would suggest that joint investment to secure WMD when the government collapses.
Yes.
That's a joke. That's a joke. I'm saying it with a smile. We got limited time, so let me open the floor to questions. I've got a ton of other questions, but go ahead.
I'm very interested in... I'm sorry, my name is Andrew Hubert. I'm very interested in the issue of international auditing and compliance and the exchange of financial information, particularly in terms of China not really cooperating with the release of financials. How big a problem do you see this? Did you look at this, and how big a problem is it? What is the trajectory of the solution? Where do you see this going?
I'll give you, this isn't something that we looked in particular. Since our center has been looking at global governance as a group, and myself is for a book project as well, that's obviously come across my radar screen. And so I'm interested in it, although I'm not an expert in it. My general sense is what we have are questions of sovereignty on both sides. Both are using that norm as a way to be able to extend their regulation or limit regulation. The U.S. thinks that if you're going to list in the United States and you are a publicly traded firm, then the accountants, you ought to be able to look at all the records, whereas the Chinese say, well, if that's stuff that comes from China, then we reserve the right in case there's national security or thing in the way that we can't just give a blanket yes. So you have two governments using the same principle for asking for different things. My sense is that those are both reasonable principles, but I think the real solution is for the Chinese to quietly get out of the way. When the next time the U.S. asks, for them not to say no, and just to allow it to occur, but without saying that a new principle has been created. I think at the end of the day, that's the best solution, because if you don't have that solution, I don't see the SEC or others in the United States saying, well, we thought we were serious about this, but now we really don't care. So I think that, and if the Chinese don't do that, then I think that has a lot of negative consequences for the listing of Chinese firms in the U.S., potentially in other markets, and so. But I don't think they want to do it through the enunciation of a new principle. I think they just want to hope it goes away.
My name is Jordan with White Pine Trading. China, I have a question. Do you feel that China will protect North Korea mainly because it never wants U.S. on the Chinese border?
Not exactly good.
That was on page 7 of our report. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, I teach a lot about Chinese relations with its East Asian neighbors and U.S. relationship, and although it's not explicitly relevant to economic global governance, there's still some larger principles at stake, and certainly the Chinese have a security concern about not wanting a potential competitor or enemy on its border, and that trumps the concern about the development of nuclear weapons in violation of the NPT. I'm not sure how they're going to resolve it. We were making a joke about going in and jointly buying up WMD, but my guess is securing them. If there is a crisis where it looks like there's no government, and North Korea just has sort of a thin veneer of a government now, I would expect China to be a lot more proactive than it is right now on a whole variety of dimensions that usually people are wondering what the U.S. is going to do. I think at the end of the day, North Korea is on China's border, not America's border, and it will eventually be a Chinese problem. That the two countries are having difficulty working on it and talking ahead is partly a security issue. It's also sort of the same type of problems that they have dealing with lots of difficult issues, both economic and security.
You talked about China's compliance with WTO, and I think you said that they did it without breaking a sweat. Was that? And they didn't change the institution?
Yes.
The way you put it?
Yes.
Do you consider yourself an outlier in that view, since the report by the USTR on China's WTO compliance certainly does not use that language and basically says for the first 5 years there was some reform, and subsequent to that we've seen no reform, we've seen backsliding, we've seen compliance at times with the letter and violation of the spirit. How does that kind of work with your view of China and global governance?
If I was the U.S. and wanted to help my companies get into the China market, I'd say the exact same thing. I think you can use a variety of standards to measure compliance with the WTO. And compliance with the WTO doesn't mean the more liberal, the more you comply. Because that's not the WTO rules. The WTO rules offer lots of exceptions, explicit exceptions, for protection in the case of the environment, public health, national security, and other things. And so sometimes when you comply and are sometimes when you're more protectionist, you're complying more. So, but let me get back to, but I think the more fundamental issue is what is the standard of compliance? Is it having a laissez-faire economic approach? Or, which might be some people's approach, that's Jim McGregor's view. Jim McGregor says, if you have state intervention, if you have something that looks like state capitalism, or as he calls it, the authoritarian capitalism, that's inconsistent with the WTO. Or if you're a government that makes or if you represent a government where your companies are having difficulties and those difficulties may be increasing, and you point out those obstacles, but it's just your government's stated position, but nothing that's been officially decided, is that a good standard? I think those are reasonable standards for having a conversation about the direction China's economy is going in, but not compliance. So I think that occurs when a neutral third party makes a pretty clear determination after reviewing a lot of facts. And so so the record, I think, is how is China done in the WTO in those cases. And it's lost a bunch of cases, but others have lost a lot more since then. And in every case that the Chinese have lost, they've come into compliance with the WTO rules within the 12 months that they're supposed to. Only one case they didn't, which was on the distribution of publications because of the movies, which ran into the interests of the propaganda department. And then they negotiated a deal between Xi Jinping and Obama that Hollywood signed off on. In fact, Xi Jinping was in Hollywood when they reached the deal because he was on his way back from the East Coast. So I guess it's what standard you want. Whether I'm an outlier or not, I'm happy. I'm happy being just me. So.
But you would the trade industry in Washington would consider, I think it's fair to say, would say that is not the view that is generally held. No?
No, I think actually there's. I don't think the standard view is that China is running amok of the system. I think that's a Clyde Prestowitz view, and some others. But I think that people watch it on a daily basis think that. I
think it's the view. It's also the view in the U.S. body politic.
Yes.
It's the view that that Governor Romney stated, that the president has stated.
You go a lot against the government.
By the way, I don't. Being an outlier to me is good. By the way,
Yeah,
I'm with you. I'm with you on this. I'm not against you on this. I am an outlier. I just want to see why you are an outlier too.
There's also sort of larger principles about, are you gaming the system? I mean, the WTO system and others were created by people who wanted to game systems. They're lawyers, right? That's what lawyers do. It's not a bad thing. I think lawyering is great, but the complexity of the rules are on purpose. And what you're supposed to do. I don't know if you ever played a lot of basketball, or if you watched the NCAA tournament. And I come from a school that had a team that lost, and maybe one of the reasons
that in the intro.
Maybe one of the reasons they lost is because Syracuse plays zone defense, and they bump us a lot. they push us, they foul us without letting the refs see them foul us. That's what they do. They play cheap defense, and they double dribbled, but the ref didn't see it. They stepped on the end line, but no one caught them.
Okay,
You get the point. So.
Fun, do you want to add anything on this topic?
Well, generally speaking, I think on WTO issue, China is for the status quo. Before China entered into WTO, China to some extent was frightened, scared, because we believe that when we open the door and all the U.S. company and Japanese company, European company will come, and a lot of Chinese company will go bankruptcy. But it didn't happen. So before China's entry into WTO, people would say that we have to learn how to dance with the wolves. But then when we enter into the WTO, we realize that we are the wolf. So I think that China is quite happy with WTO. So we are one of the best students in the WTO system.
Do you think this perception that you mentioned in the article that there is that Chinese companies really worry about the investment environment in the United States, when really probably America is one of the most welcoming places in the world to foreign investment? So do you think that's a perception based on reality, based on media distortion?
Well, I think in this case, media doesn't play a very positive role. Both the U.S. and some Chinese medias, because they tend to emphasize the difficulty and the problem, but they just ignore. There were a lot of very successful cases in both sides. In the China side, a lot of American companies making a lot of money, and in the U.S. side, and a lot of Chinese companies are very active. As we mentioned in our report, even in the shale gas revolution, there's Chinese company involved, investing in this energy sector, and then help to do the innovation. So in the future, I think maybe one way to help is for the media from both sides to better use this very successful example, and then to show people that there's more hope.
Sure. I think there's two types of difficulties with investing in the U.S. that are real. I think the first one for most Chinese companies, I heard this from someone who is a top executive in a very large Chinese state-owned enterprise, and he said, when I moved from the countryside to Beijing, it was really a shock to me. I went from places, where people rode bicycles and we worked in the fields, and I came to this big city and there's a lot of cars and traffic lights and police on every intersection. When I invest in Africa, I feel just like I'm back in the countryside. But when I get to the United States, there's all these rules and complexities and lawyers and PR firms, and it's really hard for them to get their arms around. It's a total shock. So now that's not a intentional obstacle, but it's a learning curve that they have to go on. The other one is I do think that there's some concerns in the United States about investment from China, because it's from China, and there's good reasons to be concerned on national security grounds. But that leads, but because of the unpredictability and non-transparency of the CFIUS process, or the political conversation that concerns individual cases, that seeps into the dialogue, and I think it has an eroding effect on mutual confidence. But I don't think there's not only a transparency problem on our side; it's on the Chinese side as well. Who owns Huawei? I don't know. They won't tell you. Even if Huawei lists tomorrow, part of Huawei won't list, and we won't know about that company. Same for SOEs. Chinese companies have real difficult corporate governance problems in areas of transparency and decision making that make it understandable why we would be concerned. So there's this mutual problem that they both need to deal with. And And so I think those are real problems, that it's not just a media frenzy.
Had some hands. Go ahead.
Zhao Xue from China International Capital Corporation. So my question is sort of like between China and the U.S. is Japan, because you at the beginning you mentioned a little bit about like TPP arrangement, and you said this you don't want to mention that. So I think like Japan is kind of like unique rule in this kind of like China-U.S. relationship. One is obviously the trade relationship, and the other one might be Japan's experience like 20 years ago when Japanese business wants to get into U.S., the U.S. business goes to Japan at that time. So what kind of like experience like this stage can learn from that kind of view?
You want to go first?
Well, I think this is a more broad issue than TPP because the tension between China and Japan. But there's definitely should be a way to solve this problem. You know, history matters when you design your diplomatic policy. So if you look at the past 100 years, and then there's no way to solve the tension between China and Japan. Anytime you mention Japan, and then you remember for more than 100 years, and they invaded you and they kill people, and but then China has a history of more than 2,000 years. So if you take the time horizon to more than 1,000 years, and you can solve all the problem. China and Japan have a very friendly relationship during Tang Dynasty. And one ancient Chinese philosopher, how do you pronounce Mencius, right?
Mencius.
Yeah, Mengzi, the student of Kongzi. And he mentioned that in order to deal with a small country, and you need a benevolent prince. And in order to deal with a large country, and you need a wise prince. And I have to say, now the problem with China's diplomatic policy is when we deal a small country like Japan, we do not think we are a large country. And in some cases, when we are dealing with a country like the United States, we don't think we are a small country. So in the future, there has to be some change of mindset and to figure out some way to solve the problem. And because of this historical memory and political tension, I think economic cooperation will be the only way that we can solve this problem indirectly. Yeah.
Scott?
In a more specific issue regarding investment, Japanese in the 70s and 80s started investing a lot in the United States. They bought companies lock, stock, and barrel, majority, sent over management, ran into lots of problems. Chinese companies that I've talked to that have gone to Australia, the United States, and elsewhere, with their own management, same problems. The gradual transition that we're seeing is moving more to minority stakes, where you may send some managers, but to learn from and collaborate with the existing management. And I think, that the learning curve is extremely quick. I know we're supposed to be talking about U.S. China relations, but since I've paid attention to what's going on in Australia, I'll just mention that if you go to the Investment Review Board's website, they're very transparent about their review of foreign companies that seek approval to get through the process there. And you can see the either rejections or withdrawals. Typically, it's withdrawal of an application. And you'll see that in 2007 and 2008, a lot of Chinese companies withdrew plans to invest. But since 2009, very few, just the same number of Chinese companies have withdrawn applications to make investments in Australia as companies from the EU, Japan from the U.S. So they figured it out. Still problems in Australia, but the learning curve is, I think, going in the right direction. I think we'll eventually we're going to see that in the U.S. as well.
I think we've run out of time, so thank Hefang, Scott Kennedy for a wonderful introduction to this, and I recommend that everybody read the paper. And I apologize to those who couldn't ask their questions, but we end promptly. Thanks.